The smallest wolf cub had stopped breathing. Elara dropped to her knees in the snow. 7 iron chains stretched across the frozen ground. 7 tiny bodies were trapped beneath them. Their fur was stiff with ice. Their paws were bleeding. One cub could no longer lift its head. And the guards had already been ordered to walk away. Leave them. That was the command. By sunrise, there should be nothing left. Elara stared at the 7 cages, then at the fortress rising beyond the snow. She knew what would happen if she interfered. She was an Omega, rejected, unwanted. A woman who had already been told once that her life meant less than the people standing above her. But then the smallest cub made a sound, barely a whimper. Elara looked back. The little white wolf was staring directly at her through the iron bars, not begging, waiting, as if it already knew she would come. Elara walked toward the cage. One guard stepped in front of her. Don't. She looked at the cub, then at the lock. Give me the key. The guard laughed. You think you can save them? Elara's fingers closed around the cold iron. No. She looked into his eyes. I know I can. The first lock snapped open. The guards reached for their weapons. The second lock fell, then the third. 6 frightened cubs began crawling toward freedom, but the 7th remained motionless. Elara reached for the final chain, and that was when the mountain howled. Every torch in the courtyard shook. Every guard froze. The 7 cubs suddenly lifted their heads. Far beyond the frozen forest, something answered the howl. Something powerful. Something that had been silent for months. A man opened his eyes inside a hidden chamber beneath the mountains. His wolf had sensed the cubs, all 7 of them, alive. His voice was barely a whisper. Who saved them? But the answer was already moving through the snow. Because the woman kneeling beside those dying cubs was not just a rejected Omega. She was carrying a secret the kingdom had spent years trying to bury. And before sunrise, the Alpha King would discover that the 7 creatures everyone wanted dead had chosen her. The only question was, why? The 7th cub had already stopped crying. That was what frightened Elara most. 6 tiny bodies still trembled behind the iron bars, while snow swept across the abandoned yard. Their fur was soaked. Their paws were swollen where the chains had cut into them. One cub lay so still that Elara could barely see its chest move. The guards behind her had already turned away. They will not survive the night. Elara looked at the 7 cages. Then she looked toward the distant fortress where the Alpha King's banners disappeared into the storm. The order had been simple. Leave the cubs there. Give them no food. Send no healer. By sunrise, there would be nothing left to save. As a rejected Omega, she had spent years making herself smaller. She spoke softly. She kept her eyes lowered. She never questioned wolves above her rank. Months earlier, Lucian had rejected her before half the pack. He had not shouted. He had simply looked at her with calm certainty and said she was not the future he wanted. Since that day, Elara had carried his judgment like a stone inside her chest. But now she stood before 7 creatures who had been condemned for the same reason she understood too well. Someone had decided they were not worth saving. Elara stepped closer. The largest gray cub lifted his head. His body was thin, but he still placed himself between her and the others. A low growl rolled from his throat. Elara stopped. I am not here to hurt you. The cub did not believe her. Neither did the dark one beside him. That cub pressed against the bars and showed its teeth. A white cub watched Elara without blinking. Elara slowly lowered herself onto the frozen stone. She did not reach for them. She simply sat. You heard the order. Elara kept her eyes on the cubs. Who gave it? The council. And why? They are dangerous. Elara looked at the cages again. Dangerous wolves do not look like that. Do not make trouble for yourself. She had spent years learning that silence kept an Omega safe. Tonight's silence would kill 7 innocent lives. The smallest cub moved. It dragged itself across the stone. Its chain scraped softly behind it. Elara watched as the little white wolf stopped at the edge of the cage. Its eyes were pale and tired. It lifted one paw and placed it against the bars. Elara slowly raised her hand. The guard stepped forward. "Do not touch it." Elara ignored him. Her fingers slipped between the bars. The cub sniffed them. Then it pressed its nose against her hand. Elara felt something strange in her chest. It was the kind of recognition that came when one wounded creature looked at another and understood without words. "You are cold." Her voice broke slightly. "I know." She glanced at the guards. "Where is the key?" Neither answered. "I asked where the key is." "You are not freeing them." "Then why bring them here?" The older guard looked toward the fortress. "Orders are orders." Elara understood what that meant. No one wanted blood on their own hands. They would let the cold do the killing. She reached inside her coat and felt the small metal tool hidden there. She had taken it from the kitchen earlier that day. Now she knew why she had kept it. She knelt beside the first lock. The gray cub watched her. Elara pushed the tool into the mechanism. Click. The lock opened. The guard grabbed her shoulder. "You will regret this." Elara pulled away. Maybe. She opened the second lock. Then the third. Snow rushed through the broken roof. The wind screamed across the yard. Chains struck stone as the cubs tried to move. The fourth lock opened, then the fifth and sixth. The final cage belonged to the smallest white cub. Elara reached for the lock. Then she heard it. A howl. Deep, distant, impossible. It came from the direction of the royal fortress. Elara froze. The cubs froze with her. The white cub lifted its head. Every one of the 7 wolves turned toward the mountains. The howl came again. It was not the sound of an ordinary wolf. The guards stared at each other. One whispered a name. Kael. Elara slowly looked toward the fortress. Some said he was dead. Others said he had abandoned the kingdom. The council had ruled in his absence. Yet something inside that fortress had just answered the 7 dying cubs. Elara looked down at the final lock. Her hand trembled. Then she opened it. The smallest white cub stepped out. It did not run. It walked straight to Elara and pressed its body against her ankle. Behind it, the other 6 followed. A horn sounded from the fortress, then another. The guards turned. They know. They would come for them. Elara had no army, no rank, no powerful family. Only a hidden healing house in the mountains, and a few hours before the search began, she gathered the smallest cub into her arms. "Come with me." The gray wolf moved first, then the others. Elara led them toward the old drainage tunnel beneath the yard. Behind her, the guards shouted. Ahead waited darkness, and somewhere far beyond the mountains, the missing Alpha King opened his eyes. He had felt them, all 7, and somehow he could feel one more presence beside them, a human heart, a rejected Omega. The only person in the kingdom who had refused to leave them behind. The tunnel was narrower than Elara remembered. She had discovered 8 years ago when she was searching for wild herbs near the old fortress. Back then it had been nothing more than a forgotten passage beneath the stones. Tonight it became the only road between 7 frightened cubs and the soldiers hunting them. Elara crawled first. Her palms scraped against the cold stone. Behind her came the soft sound of paws. Ash stayed close to the smaller cubs. Snow moved carefully beside Willow. Thorn kept looking back toward the entrance as if expecting the guards to appear at any moment. Flint stumbled twice but refused to make a sound. River kept lifting his head whenever he heard something above them. Ember stayed closest to Elara. Then Willow fell. Elara turned immediately. The little cub had collapsed against the tunnel wall. Her breathing was shallow. One front paw was swollen badly. Come here. Elara lifted her carefully. Willow was almost weightless. That frightened Elara more than anything else. She held the cub against her chest and kept moving. Her arms began to ache. Her knees were numb. Cold water soaked through her clothes. Still, she refused to stop. Behind them came a distant shout. They went into the tunnel. Elara froze. The cubs became silent. She could hear boots above the stone ceiling. They cannot have gone far. Elara lowered herself and covered Willow with her cloak. Ash pressed against the other cubs. Even Thorn stayed still. A shadow passed across a crack in the ceiling. Then another. Elara held her breath. One guard stopped directly above them. "Search the lower passage," another voice answered. "There is no entrance there." The footsteps moved away. Elara waited until the sound disappeared. Then she whispered, "Keep moving." The tunnel finally opened into a dark valley beneath the mountain. Elara knew the path. At the far end stood an abandoned healing house. Its stone walls were covered with moss. Its windows were broken. Snow had gathered against the wooden door. No one had used the place in years. That was exactly why she chose it. She pushed the door open. The cubs entered. Elara closed it behind them. For the first time since the iron yard, she allowed herself to breathe. She found dry wood beneath an old table and built a small fire. The flames slowly pushed back the darkness. Warm light moved across the faces of the 7 cubs. Elara began working. She cleaned Willow's paw. She wrapped the wound. She mixed herbs with warm water. She checked each cub for injuries. The gray cub had a deep cut along his shoulder. Snow had marks around her neck from the chain. Thorn's paws were bleeding. Flint was exhausted. River had a fever. Ember had the worst condition of all. She was dangerously thin. Elara stared at her. "You should have died out there." Ember blinked. Elara touched her head. "But you didn't." The cub closed her eyes. Elara smiled sadly. "Neither did I." The words escaped before she could stop them. She sat beside the fire. For a moment she remembered Lucian. The day he rejected her. The crowd. The silence. The way she had stood there pretending she did not care. She had spent so long believing rejection was proof that something inside her was broken. Now 7 abandoned. Cubs were sleeping because she had refused to believe the same thing about them. A sudden movement caught her attention. Ember was awake. The little white cub was staring toward the far wall. Elara followed her gaze. There was nothing there. "What's wrong?" Ember walked toward the wall. She sniffed the stones, then scratched one section with her paw. Elara frowned. She moved closer. A loose stone shifted beneath her fingers. She pulled it free. Behind it was a narrow wooden box. Her heart began beating faster. She placed the box on the table. The lock had already rusted away. Inside were old papers. Most had been damaged by moisture. One page was still readable. Elara held it close to the fire. Her eyes stopped on a familiar name. Mira Vane. Her mother. Elara's hands began to shake. She read the first lines. Mira had served in the royal healing house. She had treated members of the royal family. Then Elara saw another phrase, 7 royal heirs. She looked toward the cubs. Her throat tightened. "No," she read again. The words did not change. The cubs were connected to the royal bloodline. But why? Had the kingdom chained them? Why had the council wanted them dead? And why had her mother written about them? Elara searched deeper into the box. At the bottom was a small leather journal. She knew the cover. Her mother had owned it. Elara opened the first page. Healing recipes, plant names, notes about winter sickness. Then the writing changed. The next pages described secret meetings, a royal family under threat. A council that could no longer be trusted. A warning that certain bloodlines were being watched. Elara turned another page. One sentence stopped her completely. "If the 7 ever return, keep them away from the council." Elara stared at it. Her mother had known. Not guessed, known. A noise came from outside. Elara closed the journal. The cubs woke. She extinguished the fire. A horn sounded in the valley. Then another. Search parties were moving through the forest. A voice carried through the night. Search every house. Elara pressed herself against the wall. The cubs gathered around her. She could hear the guards getting closer. One of them stopped outside the healing house. The door handle moved. Elara's hand went to the knife at her waist. The handle moved again. Then silence. A long moment passed. The footsteps finally moved away. Elara waited until the sound disappeared. Only then did she light the fire again. She looked at the 7 cubs. They were watching her, no longer as strangers, no longer as frightened animals. They had begun to trust her, but the journal had changed everything. The cubs were not simply creatures she had rescued. They were part of a secret that someone had tried to bury, and her mother had been involved. Elara closed the journal and held it against her chest. "I don't know what happened to you," she looked at the cubs, "but I promise I will find out." Far beyond the mountains, another figure moved through the snow. He wore a dark cloak. His face was hidden beneath the hood. He stopped suddenly. His head lifted, his eyes closed. 7 scents reached him through the cold air, alive. Then he sensed something else, a human presence beside them. The stranger opened his eyes. For the first time in months, there was hope in them. He whispered one word, "Elara," and then he started walking toward the mountains. The stranger reached the mountain valley just before dawn. Snow covered his boots. The wind pulled at his dark cloak. He had been walking through the night without stopping. His body was exhausted, but he refused to rest. Something inside him kept pushing forward. 7 lives were waiting somewhere beyond the trees. 7 lives that should have been lost. He could feel them. The bond was faint but unmistakable. Then he felt something else, a human presence, Elara. His wolf stirred beneath his skin. For months, Kael Draeven had lived with silence. The kingdom believed its Alpha King was dead. The council had announced that he had vanished during a border attack. Some claimed enemy wolves had killed him. Others whispered that he had abandoned Aurelia when the kingdom needed him most. Kael had allowed those rumors to spread. He had needed the freedom to investigate. But now the truth had become impossible to ignore. Someone had lied about the 7 cubs. Someone had lied about him. And somehow Elara had found the missing pieces. Inside the old healing house, Elara sat beside the dying fire. She had not slept. The journal rested beside her. The cubs were scattered around the room. Ash guarded the door. Snow slept near Elara's feet. Thorn remained awake. River was watching the wall where the hidden box had been found. Ember slept against Elara's side. Elara reached down and touched her fur. "You are keeping secrets from me." Ember opened one eye. Elara smiled faintly. "I suppose I am keeping some from you too." A sound came from outside. Elara immediately stood. The cubs woke. She reached for the knife. The door opened. A man stepped inside. He was tall and broad-shouldered. Snow covered his black coat. His face looked tired. There was a fresh cut near his jaw. He stopped when he saw the cubs. For a moment, his entire expression changed. The hard lines around his eyes softened. "They are alive." Elara kept the knife raised. "Who are you?" The man looked at her. "Where did you find them?" That is not an answer. His eyes moved toward the journal, then toward Ember. He seemed to understand something. "You saved them." Elara's grip tightened. "How do you know?" "Because they are alive." "That tells me nothing." He studied her carefully. Most people would have lowered their eyes under his stare. Elara did not. That interested him. He noticed the bandages, the bowls of food, the herbs, the clean water. He noticed the exhaustion in her face. "You treated them yourself." "Yes." "You have no healer here." "I know." He looked at Willow. The little cub was breathing peacefully. She would have died. I know. The stranger looked back at Elara. You should not have been able to save her. Elara frowned. Why? Because the council took every healer from this region 3 months ago. She stared at him. Why? I am still trying to find out. His answer sounded honest. That made her more cautious. He stepped forward. Ash moved between them. A low growl filled the room. The stranger stopped. I am not here to hurt them. Ash did not move. Elara glanced at the gray cub. He does not trust you. He has reason not to. That answer surprised her. The stranger slowly lowered himself to one knee. He extended his hand. Ash sniffed the air. Then Snow moved. She walked toward the stranger. Elara watched closely. Snow stopped in front of him. She sniffed his fingers. The stranger's eyes closed for a moment. He knew her. Not as a stranger, as family. Snow then turned away. She walked back to Elara. The man looked at Elara again. They chose you. Elara shook her head. I only helped them. No. His voice was quiet. They chose you before you understood what they were. Elara stared at him. Who are they? The stranger did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the 7 cubs. Then his eyes returned to hers. They are royal. Elara felt the room change. She had already seen the words in her mother's journal, but hearing them from this man made the truth heavier. Royal what? Heirs. Elara's breathing stopped. The man continued. Every one of them carries the blood of the old royal line. Then why were they chained? His jaw tightened. Because someone wanted them dead. The words were simple. The meaning was not. Elara lowered the knife slightly. Who? I do not know yet. You expect me to believe that? No. His answer came immediately. I expect you to question everything I say. Elara studied him. There was something strange about him. He carried authority without demanding it. He did not speak loudly. He did not need to. Then the largest cub moved. Ash approached the stranger. The man lowered his hand. Ash sniffed him. Then his ears dropped. The cub recognized him. The stranger touched Ash's head. His expression became painful. I thought you were all dead. Elara watched him carefully. You know them? Yes. How? The man looked at her. My name is Kael Draeven. The world seemed to stop. Elara stared at him. She knew that name. Everyone in Aurelia knew it. The Alpha King. The missing king. The ruler whose banners still flew above the fortress. The man the council claimed was gone. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. You are Kael. Yes. She took a step backward. You are the Alpha King. Yes. The cubs remained calm. Elara looked from them to him. Then something inside Ember changed. The smallest white cub stood. She walked toward Kael. For 1 second, Elara thought she was going to welcome him. Instead, Ember stopped at his feet. Her fur rose. A deep growl came from her tiny chest. Kael looked down. His expression became serious. Why does she do that? Elara crouched beside Ember. She does not trust something. Kael looked at her. What? I do not know. Ember continued growling. Kael did not move. He simply watched her. Then he looked at Elara. What happened before I arrived? Elara told him everything. The iron yard. The chains. The guards. The escape. The journal. Her mother's warning. Kael listened without interrupting. When she finished, he walked toward the table. He picked up the journal. His fingers stopped on Mira Vane's name. You knew my mother? Elara asked. Kael looked at the page. Yes. The answer struck her harder than expected. How? She served my family. He turned another page. She warned my father about a threat inside the council. Elara's eyes widened. What happened to her? Kael looked at her. She disappeared. Elara's face went pale. She was supposed to be dead. I know. Silence filled the room. Then Kael noticed something written on the final page. His expression changed. He read the sentence slowly. If the 7 ever return, keep them away from the council. He looked toward the cubs, then toward Elara. Your mother knew they would come back. Elara swallowed. Why? Kael had no answer, but before he could speak, a distant horn echoed through the valley. The cubs lifted their heads. Kael moved toward the window. Smoke rose beyond the trees. Soldiers were approaching. He turned back. They found us. Elara gathered the journal. Where do we go? Kael looked at the hidden passage beneath the old healing house, then at the 7 cubs, then at Elara. There is one place the council has never been able to enter. Where? Kael opened the door. The Moon Archive. He stepped into the snow. Elara followed. The 7 cubs moved behind them, but as Ember crossed the doorway, she suddenly stopped. She looked back toward the darkness beneath the healing house. Then she looked at Elara. Something about that place was not finished with them. And somewhere deep beneath the mountain, a stone mechanism quietly shifted. The Moon Archive stood beyond the northern ridge where the mountains rose like walls around the kingdom. Elara had heard stories about it since childhood. Some said the archive held every secret the royal family had ever recorded. Others claimed the oldest rooms had been sealed for centuries because certain truths were too dangerous to remember. Tonight, the place was no longer a legend. It was their only chance. Kael led them through the forest while snow fell around them. He moved quickly, but never so fast that the cubs were left behind. Elara noticed that. He could have carried them himself. He could have ordered her to follow. Instead, he adjusted his pace whenever Willow slowed. Ash stayed near the front. Snow remained beside Elara. Thorn watched the trees. Flint kept disappearing behind fallen branches and returning seconds later. River seemed focused on the ground. Ember walked silently. The distant horns faded behind them. For the first time since the Iron Yard, Elara felt as if they had escaped the immediate danger. But she knew better. The council had found them once. They would find them again. After several hours, Kael stopped beside a frozen stream. We rest here. Elara looked at the sky. We cannot stay long. I know. He removed his cloak and placed it over Willow. Elara watched him. You are cold. I have survived worse. That does not mean you should. Kael looked at her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he gave a faint smile. You sound like a healer. My mother was one. I know. The words made Elara look away. She still had questions about Mira. Too many. But she was afraid of the answers. They continued before sunrise. By afternoon, the Moon Archive appeared between the mountains. It was built into a cliff. No towers, no guards, only an enormous stone door covered in ancient markings. Kael stepped forward. The door did not move. Elara noticed River staring at one of the symbols. What is it? River scratched the snow. Then he moved toward the left side of the door. Elara followed. There was a narrow carving beneath the frost. 7 lines surrounded a crescent. She remembered the mark from Ember's fur. Kael. He turned. Elara brushed away the snow. The symbol was identical. Kael's face became serious. He placed his hand against the stone. Nothing happened. Elara tried. Still nothing. Then Ember walked forward. She touched the symbol with her paw. The mountain trembled. Stone shifted. A deep sound rolled through the ground. The enormous door opened. Kael stared at Ember. I have never seen that happen. Elara looked at the cub. Neither have I. They entered. The archive was enormous. Shelves stretched into darkness. Thousands of books rested behind glass. Ancient maps covered the walls. Royal portraits watched them from the shadows. The cubs moved quietly between the shelves. Elara felt the weight of the place. This was where the kingdom had kept its memory, and someone had tried to erase part of it. Kael went toward the royal records. Elara searched for her mother's name. She found it in a section marked Healers of the Crown. Her hands trembled as she opened the record. Mira Vane had served the royal family for 17 years. She had treated Kael when he was young. She had cared for his father. Then a final entry appeared, transferred to restricted royal service. Elara frowned. What does that mean? Kael came closer. It means she discovered something. How do you know? Because my father used that phrase when he wanted information hidden. Elara looked at him. You never knew? No. The answer sounded painful. Kael pulled another book from the shelf. Inside were records of royal births. 7 names appeared, all 7 cubs. Elara recognized them immediately. Then she noticed something strange. The dates were wrong. The official records claimed the cubs had died shortly after birth. Kael's jaw tightened. The council knew. Elara turned another page. There was a hidden note. The heirs must never be registered publicly until the guardian returns. Elara stared at the words. Guardian. Kael looked at her. Neither spoke. Then River suddenly barked. He had found a loose stone beneath a shelf. Elara pushed it aside. A narrow compartment opened. Inside was a bundle of letters. One carried her mother's seal. Elara opened it. The first line made her heart stop. If you are reading this, then the 7 have survived. Her hand shook. She continued. The royal heirs were never the true target. They were bait. Someone inside the council wants the throne. The children are the key to proving it. But they cannot survive without the guardian bloodline. Elara looked up. Kael was staring at her. Your mother knew. Elara could barely speak. She knew everything. Another letter contained a warning. Trust the king only if he listens before he commands. Elara looked at Kael. He read the sentence. Then he gave a quiet laugh. What? She knew you. I was a child when she left. She still knew what you would become. Kael's expression softened. She knew my father too. Elara lowered the letter. What happened to her? Kael looked toward the dark shelves. I do not know. A sound came from the far end of the archive. Footsteps. They both turned. The cubs became alert. Kael moved in front of Elara. Stay behind me. She looked at him. I can protect myself. I know. He drew his blade. That is why I am asking you to protect the evidence. Elara understood. She gathered the letters. The footsteps stopped. Silence returned. Then a voice echoed through the archive. King Kael. Elara's blood turned cold. Lord Varen. He had found them. Kael looked toward the entrance. How did he get here? Elara remembered Ember's reaction at the healing house. The hidden mechanism, the old passage. The archive was not simply a library. It was connected to something beneath the kingdom. Before they could move, a section of the floor opened. A staircase descended into darkness. 7 ancient symbols appeared along the stone. Then an 8th symbol slowly became visible. Elara stepped closer. It was hers. She stared at it. Kael whispered her name. The cubs gathered around her. And somewhere, beneath the archive, a lock turned for the first time in hundreds of years. The mountain had been waiting for them. Now it was opening. The hidden staircase descended beneath the moon archive. Elara stood at the entrance with her mother's letters pressed against her chest. The 7 cubs gathered around her feet. Kael remained beside her with his sword drawn. Above them, the voice of Lord Varen echoed through the ancient halls. King Kael. You cannot hide forever. Kael looked toward the doorway. We do not have time. Elara nodded. They descended. The stone steps were narrow and uneven. Ancient dust covered every surface. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. No torch burned along the walls, yet faint silver markings appeared beneath their feet whenever Ember stepped forward. Elara watched in silence. The markings followed her. Not Kael, not the cubs. Her, she stopped. Why does it respond to me? Kael looked back. I do not know. You keep saying that. I would rather tell you I do not know than give you an answer I cannot prove. Elara studied him. That was becoming the thing she trusted most about him. He never pretended to have all the answers. They continued downward. At the bottom stood a circular chamber. 7 stone pillars surrounded a large table. Each pillar carried the symbol of one royal heir. In the center was a single empty space. Elara stepped toward it. The symbol appeared, her symbol. A crescent surrounded by 7 lines, the same mark that had appeared beneath Ember's fur, the same mark they had seen throughout the archive. Elara touched it. The room changed. A soft sound moved through the stone. One by one, the 7 pillars lit with silver light. The cubs stood beneath them, ash beneath the first, snow beneath the second, thorn beneath the third, willow beneath the fourth, flint beneath the 5th, river beneath the 6th, ember beneath the 7th. Elara stood in the center. A voice echoed through the chamber, not a living voice, an ancient recording preserved in the stone. The 7 heirs cannot survive without the guardian. Alara's breath caught. The voice continued. The guardian will not be chosen by blood alone. The guardian will be recognized by those who have been abandoned. Elara looked at the cubs. Her eyes filled with tears. All her life she had believed her rejection was proof that she was lesser. Now she understood something. Her greatest wound had also taught her how to recognize suffering in others. The voice faded. A hidden compartment opened beneath the table. Inside was another letter. Elara picked it up. The seal belonged to her mother. She broke it with trembling fingers. My daughter. Elara stopped breathing. If you are reading this, then I was unable to return to you. Her vision blurred. I need you to understand one thing. You were never born to serve those who look down on you. You were born to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Elara covered her mouth. Kael looked away. He gave her the privacy to grieve. The letter continued. The royal heirs will one day return. When they do, they will seek the person who carries the guardian mark. Do not search for power. Search for what is right. Elara lowered the letter. My mother knew I would find them. She believed you would, Kael said. Elara looked at him. She believed in me before I ever had a reason to believe in myself. Kael nodded. She knew you better than the people who rejected you. Those words struck deeper than he realized. Elara looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled faintly. Thank you. Kael did not answer. He simply stayed beside her. A loud crash echoed above. Varen had entered the archive. Kael's expression hardened. We have to move. Elara folded the letter and placed it safely inside her coat. They returned toward the upper chamber. But before they reached the stairs, another sound came from outside. Horns, many of them. Kael stopped. That is not Varen. Elara listened. The horns were coming from different directions. Pack leaders, warriors. The old relay system had carried the truth beyond the mountains. Someone had received the evidence. The kingdom was beginning to wake up. Kael looked at Elara. You did that. She shook her head. We did. His eyes softened. It was the first time he looked at her without seeing an Omega or a Guardian. He simply saw Elara, the woman who had saved 7 lives when everyone else had turned away. Then a voice came from the entrance. Where is she? Elara recognized it. Lucian. Her former mate stepped into the archive with 2 guards. His face was pale. His eyes found Elara. Then the cubs. Then Kael. For several seconds he could not speak. You. Elara stood still. Lucian looked around. You did all this? Elara said nothing. He took a slow step forward. I thought you would disappear. I almost did. His expression changed. I never thought you would become this. Elara looked at him calmly. I did not become anything. She glanced toward the 7 cubs. I stopped letting other people decide what I was worth. Lucian lowered his eyes. For the first time he looked ashamed, but Elara felt no victory. Only closure. Then a violent crash shook the archive. Varen's soldiers had breached the lower doors. Kael moved instantly. Everyone stays behind me. Elara shook her head. No. Kael looked at her. We cannot fight them here. She pointed toward the ancient chamber. The relay system. Kael understood. If they could activate the old network again, then every pack in Aurelia would receive the evidence directly. No council could bury it. No guard could destroy it. Elara ran toward the central chamber. The cubs followed. Kael and Lucian held the passage behind them. Elara placed her mother's letter on the stone table. The guardian symbol appeared beneath it. The entire chamber began to tremble. Silver light raced through the ancient carvings. Then the mountain answered. A deep sound rolled across the kingdom. Bells began ringing, one after another. The truth was moving through Aurelia. Varen's secret was no longer a secret, but just as Elara thought they had won, a shadow appeared at the far end of the chamber. Varen stood there. His face was cold. His sword was drawn. He looked at the 7 cubs, then at Elara. You should have stayed invisible. Elara stepped forward. I was invisible because people like you never bothered to look. Varen smiled. Then perhaps I should have looked sooner. The cubs moved closer to Elara. And for the first time, Varen understood that the woman he had dismissed was no longer standing alone. The chamber seemed to shrink around them. Varen stood at the far end with his sword in his hand. Behind him came armed soldiers in dark armor. Their boots struck the ancient stone as they entered the room. Snow clung to their shoulders. Their faces were hard. They had followed orders for so long that they no longer questioned where those orders led. Elara stood beside the 7 cubs. Her mother's letter was still on the stone table. The guardian symbol burned beneath it. Kael stepped forward. Varen. The council lord smiled. You survived. Kael's voice remained calm. So did they. Varen looked at the cubs. For the first time, there was fear behind his eyes. They were never supposed to reach this chamber. Elara heard the words. Not supposed to. Not dangerous. Not wild. Everything she had been told had been a lie. You knew about them. Varen looked at her. I knew enough. You ordered the chains. Yes. The answer was so cold that Elara almost stopped breathing. She remembered the iron yard, the frozen stone, Willow barely breathing, Ember staring at her through the bars, all because this man had decided their lives were inconvenient. Why? Varen stepped closer. Because the kingdom does not survive on kindness. Elara shook her head. No, it survives because people protect what matters. Varen laughed softly. You still believe that? I do. That is why you are weak. Elara looked at him. For the first time, she did not feel small. I was weak when I believed people like you. Kael moved beside her. Varen's eyes shifted toward him. You always had the throne. Kael's expression hardened. And you always wanted it. I wanted order. You wanted control. Varen raised his sword. Control is what keeps kingdoms alive. The soldiers moved. Kael drew his blade. The chamber exploded into motion. Steel struck steel. The sound echoed against the ancient walls. Kael moved with precision. He never wasted a strike. He blocked one warrior and turned before the second could attack. His blade struck the man's weapon and sent it skidding across the floor. Elara pulled the cubs toward the side passage. Stay together. Ash obeyed. Snow followed. Thorn stopped. A soldier had moved toward Willow. Thorn lunged. The soldier stumbled backward. Elara grabbed Willow and pulled her away. Come on! The cubs ran through the narrow passage, but the sanctuary had only one exit. Varen knew it. He had studied the old plans. He had spent years preparing for this moment. He moved through the chamber and cut off Elara's path. Kael saw him. Elara. Varen struck. Kael blocked the blow. The impact forced him backward. Varen attacked again. Kael turned the blade aside. Their swords crossed. You should have stayed dead. Kael's eyes were cold. You should have stayed hidden. Varen pushed harder. Kael's foot slipped. The ancient floor cracked beneath him. Elara saw the danger. She looked around. The 7 cubs were trapped behind her. The relay chamber was shaking. The stone pillars had begun to move. Then Elara noticed the chains. Old iron chains hung from the wall. They were part of the ancient mechanism. Her eyes narrowed. She remembered the cages. She remembered the locks. She remembered how the smallest weakness had been enough to free the cubs. Everything she had learned from years of repairing broken things suddenly made sense. She ran toward the wall. Kael shouted her name. She ignored him. Elara grabbed one of the ancient chains. It was connected to the stone mechanism. She pulled. Nothing happened. She pulled again. The chain moved. A deep rumble filled the chamber. Varen turned. What did you do? Elara pulled harder. The floor shifted. A section of stone dropped between Varen and the soldiers. The soldiers lost their footing. Kael moved instantly. He disarmed Varen. The sword fell. Varen stumbled. Kael held him against the wall. You are finished. Varen looked at Elara. This changes nothing. Elara stepped toward him. It changes everything. Then horns sounded outside. Not one. Dozens. The sound rolled through the mountains. Pack leaders had arrived. Warriors from different territories filled the upper courtyard. The relay system had carried the truth across Aurelia. They had heard the evidence. They had heard Varen's orders. They had learned that the royal heirs were alive. One of the soldiers lowered his weapon, then another. A third stepped away from Varen. The council lord stared at them. You swore loyalty to me. The oldest warrior lowered his head. We swore loyalty to Aurelia. Varen's face changed. The power he had spent years building was disappearing in front of him. Kael ordered the guards to take him. Varen did not resist. His eyes remained fixed on Elara. You think they will love you now? Elara said nothing. You are still an Omega. She looked at him. I know. You think a crown will change that? I do not want your crown. Varen frowned. Elara stepped closer. I wanted 7 lives to survive the night. She looked toward the cubs. That was enough. Varen was taken away. Silence returned to the chamber. Kael turned toward Elara. She was breathing hard. There was blood on her sleeve. He noticed immediately. You are hurt. It is nothing. He reached for her arm. She allowed him. The wound was shallow. But his hands were careful. You should have stayed behind me. Elara looked at him. You would have been trapped. I would have found another way. So would I. Kael almost smiled. That is becoming difficult to argue with. The cubs gathered around them. Snow pressed against Elara's leg. Ash stood beside Kael. Thorn looked toward the passage. Willow rested near the fire. Flint was already investigating a broken piece of stone. River sat beneath the ancient symbols. Ember watched the doorway. Elara looked at her. What do you see? Ember did not move. Then she turned toward the passage. The little white cub walked forward. The others followed. Elara exchanged a glance with Kael. They followed the cubs. The passage led outside. The storm had stopped. For the first time that night, the sky was clear. Hundreds of stars appeared above the mountains. The royal fortress stood in the distance. Its banners moved gently in the cold wind. Kael stopped. He looked toward the kingdom. It is time to go home. Elara looked at the cubs, then at the fortress. She had never thought of that place as home. Not for herself. Not until now. Kael turned toward her. You do not have to come with me. Elara looked surprised. Why would you say that? Because I want you to choose. She studied him. Not an order, not a command, a choice. Elara looked toward the 7 cubs. Then she stepped forward. I am coming. Kael nodded. They began walking down the mountain. The cubs moved between them. But before they reached the valley, Ember stopped. She looked back, toward the dark sanctuary, toward the ancient chamber beneath the mountain. Elara followed her gaze. Something was still there, something they had not discovered. Then the stone beneath the sanctuary began to tremble. A faint sound rose from below. Not a howl, not a voice. A heartbeat. Slow. Ancient. Waiting. Elara stopped walking. Kael turned. What is it? She looked into the darkness. I think we are not finished yet. And deep beneath the mountain, the ancient door began to open. The heartbeat beneath the mountain grew louder. Elara stood at the edge of the sanctuary with Kael beside her. The 7 cubs were gathered around them. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. Another deep beat moved through the stone. Thump, then silence. Thump, the sound came from below. Kael drew his sword again. Elara, stay behind me. She looked at him. You said that before. And you ignored me. I did. A faint smile touched his face. I noticed. Ember stepped toward the opening. The little white cub placed one paw on the ancient stone. The mountain responded. A hidden staircase appeared beneath the sanctuary. Elara stared into the darkness. We have to go down. Kael nodded. They descended together. The staircase opened into a vast chamber beneath the mountain. Unlike the moon archive above, it was untouched by time. Ancient silver trees grew from the stone floor. Their branches carried pale crystals that illuminated the room. At the center stood a circular pool. The water was perfectly still. 7 small lights floated across its surface, one for each cub. Then an 8th light appeared. It moved toward Elara. She stepped closer. The water reflected her face. But the reflection was not the Elara she knew. She saw her mother. Mira stood beside the same pool. She looked younger than Elara remembered. Her face was tired. Her eyes were filled with fear. Then her voice filled the chamber. If you have found this place, then the council has already failed. Elara's eyes filled with tears. Kael stood silently beside her. Mira continued. The 7 cubs are not simply heirs. They are the living proof of the royal bloodline. Their survival will expose those who tried to control the throne. The image changed. Elara saw Varen standing before the royal council. She saw him ordering the cubs removed. She saw him hiding records. She saw him arranging the king's disappearance. Then she saw something else. Kael's father had known. He had trusted Varen. That mistake had almost destroyed the kingdom. Mira's voice returned. But there is another truth. The water became still. The guardian is not a ruler. She is the one who protects those the kingdom has forgotten. Elara looked down. She finally understood. The mark had never been a promise of power. It was a promise of responsibility. Mira's image faded. Her final words remained. Do not become what hurt you. Build something better. Elara closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. I will. Kael looked at her. You already have. She turned toward him. For a moment, the kingdom disappeared. There was no throne, no council, no old rejection. Only 2 people standing beneath an ancient mountain with 7 sleeping cubs nearby. Kael spoke softly. When I first heard your name again, I thought I was coming back to save them. Elara waited. I was wrong. She looked at him. You saved them. No. He shook his head. You did. Elara smiled. And you helped. Kael took a breath. I have spent years believing a king must carry everything alone. His eyes met hers. I do not believe that anymore. Elara felt something shift inside her, not a magical bond, not fate forcing them together. Choice. He was choosing her. She was choosing him. But neither needed to say the word yet. Ember suddenly walked toward the pool. The other 6 followed. The 7 cubs stood together. The lights above the water descended. One by one they touched the cubs. Their chains vanished completely. Not broken. Not cut. Gone. The scars remained, but the chains did not. Elara understood the meaning. The past could leave marks. It did not have to remain a prison. A sound echoed from above. The kingdom bells. One after another. Then the great bell of the royal fortress rang. Kael looked toward the ceiling. The council will be waiting, Elara stood. Then let them. They returned to the surface at sunrise. The storm had passed. Golden light spread across the mountains. Hundreds of wolves waited in the valley. Pack leaders stood beneath their banners. Healers, warriors, families, children. They had all come. When Kael stepped forward, the crowd fell silent. Then he looked at Elara. He did not walk ahead of her. He waited. Elara understood. Together they entered the valley. The 7 cubs followed. The crowd began to whisper. Some bowed to Kael, others stared at Elara. An old pack leader stepped forward. He looked at the cubs, then at the scars around their paws. His face hardened with shame. We failed them, Elara answered gently. Then do not fail them again. The words moved through the crowd. No speech was needed after that. The kingdom understood. Varen was removed from the council. The hidden records were opened. The 7 heirs were recognized. The old law that allowed Omegas to be dismissed as lesser members of society was challenged before the entire kingdom. Kael refused to rule alone. He created a new council. Healers received seats. Omegas received representation. Pack leaders were required to answer publicly for their decisions. The kingdom did not become perfect overnight, but it began changing, and Elara changed with it. She returned to the old healing house in spring. The snow had melted, wildflowers covered the valley, the 7 cubs had grown stronger. Ash was already larger than most young wolves. Snow followed Elara everywhere. Thorns still guarded every doorway. Willow slept near the fire. Flint stole anything he could carry. River loved the mountain stream. Ember remained quiet. She watched everything. One evening, Kael arrived without guards. Elara looked up from her herbs. You are late. I was working. So was I. He smiled. The cubs gathered around him. Ember approached last. She looked at Kael, then at Elara. Then she placed herself between them. Kael laughed softly. I think she is still deciding. Elara smiled. She is careful. So am I. He looked at Elara. I do not want you beside me because the kingdom expects it. She became still. I want you beside me because I choose you. Elara's eyes softened. And I choose you. Nothing more was needed. Outside the healing house, the 7 wolves ran through the green valley. The same creatures who had once been left in chains now chased one another beneath the open sky. Elara watched them. She remembered the iron yard, the frozen cages, the night when everyone else had walked away. She remembered the moment Ember had placed her tiny paw against the bars. Elara had thought she was saving 7 helpless cubs. She had not understood that they would save something inside her, too. They had taught her that rejection was not the end of a life. Sometimes it was the door to a life no one else could have imagined. Kael stood beside her. The cubs disappeared into the wildflowers. Elara smiled. For the first time in her life, she did not wonder where she belonged. She already knew. She had not been chosen because she was an Omega. She had been chosen because when 7 lives were left to die in chains, she refused to leave them there. And that was how the rejected Omega became the woman who changed a kingdom, not through a crown, not through power, but through one simple decision when everyone else walked away. She stayed.